book of Genesis, the 9th chapter, and Noah began to be an husbandman. And this is the 20th verse. And he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And the second scripture is in Samuel, 1 Samuel 18th, the 28th and 19th verse, 28th verse, and then the 19th chapter and the first verse. And that scripture says basically that Saul grew angry with David and instructed his men to kill him. Our subject today is old men acting badly. Now, I told you, I have announced to you several times that I was going to preach this sermon, Old Men Acting Badly. And actually, today was not the day that I was going to preach it. I develop these ideas for sermons, and sometimes they stay in my head months and months and sometimes years before I preach them. This was not the week that I was going to preach that sermon. In fact, I'd already developed the sermon that I was going to preach. But then, Monday or Tuesday on the news, I saw where a governor of the great state of South Carolina had gone away on the weekend to be with his mistress and left his wife and 4 sons, I think, on Father's Day, running off with a woman. Now, he's a married man. Now, even though this was not an old man, he's about 40. I thought if you're ever going to preach that sermon, this would be the week to preach it. Old men acting badly. But I think I ought to tell you why I decided to preach a sermon in the first place. Not this week, but I'm going to tell you why I decided to preach the sermon. Last year, a man that I had known for at least 30 years, more than that, 35 years, who was the owner of a business, a respectable business. After spending 3 or 4 decades developing a sterling reputation as an outstanding businessman, in the last few years, this man in his upper 70s got into practices and behaviors and destroyed his good name, and was in the news all over the country. He took and established a respectable black business, a funeral home, and destroyed it, and himself in the process. Then, a few weeks after that, my sister, who keeps up with things that I think that she probably should not know about, but she keeps up with stuff. And she called me and informed me that one of our high school teachers in his late 70s or early 80s had run off with a young woman in the church and established himself in another state. And I thought to myself, what in the world is happening to old folks? When I was a kid, it makes me nervous. When I come here and Brother Green says that Sister Green is gone to California, I get nervous. I don't know whether she's moved out, run away, or what. So when I come back and she's here, I say, oh, thank God she's back. But, there was a time that if folk got to be a certain age, You just didn't expect any foolishness from them after that. If they got to be a certain age, they were safe in church. If they got to be a certain age, if they were in business, their business would be one of integrity and character after they got to be a certain age. But now it seems that at any age, people are doing stupid things. You know, R.J. Wells said about old age, I looked up a lecture, a speech, radio speech, that I had done on growing old with dignity, 35 years ago. And I saw a couple quotations in there. One by R.J. Wells that says, a little more tired at close of day, a little less anxious to have our way, a little less ready to scold and blame, a little more care of a brother's name. And so we are nearing our journey's end, where time and eternity meet and blend. And Plato said in the Republic, old age has a great sense of calm and freedom. When the passions have relaxed their hold, you have escaped not from one master, but from many. And then Cicero said, I am very grateful for old age, for it has increased my desire for conversation and lessened my desire for food and drink. Now, those are three quotations from a speech of mine that I did in the early 70s about old age. And those sentiments are about the time when older people served as examples for young people, that older people were actually the embodiment of all that was good in society. Well, you can think how disturbing and how disconcerting it must be for me, someone who came up at a time when the older people represented such decency and such goodness, to see men in their late 70s running off from their wives with young women, and governors of states running off on Father's Day weekend from his children and his family, and coming back crying on TV with silly tears, talking about how sorry he is. Old men acting badly. Now, when I say old men in this sermon, I am not just talking about men in their 70s and their 80s. I'm talking about men who are old enough to know better. Every age has activities that are okay for that age, but there are also activities that are only for the people who are younger than that. So if you are 40, you are old compared to 20-year-olds, and you look bad doing things that 20-year-olds are doing because of their immaturity. You know, I have paid a lot of attention to this over the years, and in the last few years I've heard things about older people, and I'm disturbed by them. And the reason that I'm disturbed by them is not so much what it does to those people, but what it does to society. And that's why I'm preaching this sermon about old men acting badly. And what does it do when old men act badly? Well, the first thing that it does is that it makes teaching young men more difficult. See, when old men act badly, it makes teaching young men more difficult. Because older men are supposed to set example for younger men. And when older men are doing things that younger men are being told not to do, your message to younger men becomes weaker. One of the reasons that I stopped watching professional basketball is because I got sick of people in their late 20s and 30s who who are paid millions of dollars to play, and they are too indecent to act decent in front of millions of children watching them on television. When I saw Detroit a few years ago in the NBA playoff, I vowed I'd never watch that junk again because of the way they carried on. Grown men fighting, paying millions of dollars, and millions of kids watching them, and they were not concerned enough about the image that they project into America's youth. And then coaches have to go out the next day and deal with 12 and 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds and try to tell them that they are not to act like those men who have paid all of that money. When old men set bad examples, it makes teaching young people more difficult. I have these little girls that live across the street from me. All three of them. Two good ones and the other one, I call them. And the other day, they always, every time I come out, oh, Miss Jenkins, come across the street, come, we come into your yard. So the other day, I went out the house, and there they were out there on the sidewalk with their little bicycles. Oh, they said, oh, Miss Jenkins, come over here. Play. I don't have time to come on over. I said, it's hot. Oh, they said, come on over here. So I went over there. Well, they're very competitive. They always want me to race or all kinds of stuff. So I said to them, I have a bicycle that's prettier than these. And they said, you don't have I thought, yes, I do. Oh, I have a bike, and it's prettier than all of these bikes put together, I told them. I don't know why I bothered those children. They said, you don't have a bike. I said, yes, I do. You go get it. I said, I don't have time. It's too hot. They said, well, you don't even have a bike. Well, to prove them that I had a bike, I went and got it. Took it over there. Said, see here, rode across the street. See my bike? I said, it's prettier than all these bikes. So they looked at the bike, and then I got back on it, and one of them, I guess to get even with me, she said, wear your helmet. I said, what helmet? She said, you're not supposed to ride a bike without a helmet. Yeah. I've never used a helmet, because I don't ride my bike out in the streets. But the idea that these little girls live across the street and they've been told by their parents that you shouldn't ride a bike without a helmet. So I wouldn't ride my bike the rest of the week. It was too hot anyway. But yesterday I went out and bought a helmet. Now I don't want them to be saying to their parents, why you tell us to wear a helmet? Reverend Jenkins doesn't wear one. He is supposed to be so smart. He's writing books. He doesn't wear a helmet. Why should we wear one? Now the little one would probably say, his head is so hard he probably doesn't need one. But I, as an older person, as a grown person, as a Christian, as an educated person, as a responsible person, am aware that I am supposed to be setting an example for younger people. One of the reasons I wear seatbelts is because years ago when I was teaching, whenever one of the kids got in my car and I got into their car, the first thing they said, Mr. Jenkins, buckle your seatbelts. Kids were much more concerned than I was, and they said, buckle your seatbelt. And I started buckling them, not because I thought I would get killed if I didn't, but because I wanted to set a good example. Let your light shine, said Jesus, so that men may see your good works. So we are always setting examples, whether they are good or bad, whether we intend to or not. People are watching us. So when old men act badly, it weakens the argument to young people that they ought to do certain things. You see, in the olden days when I was a child, one of the ways that women would get their husbands to act right, you ought not let these children see you doing anything like that. They didn't curse around children. They didn't drink around children. They didn't do all that kind of stuff around children because they knew that their responsibility to the young folks was to set a good example. And when old people act badly, it makes it difficult for teachers and preachers and parents who are trying to get kids to act properly. So you see, this is a very serious message. Secondly, when old people act badly, it makes age and wisdom seem pointless. You know, it makes us, see, we can always tell children, well, when you get a little older, you'll be stronger. When you get a little older, you'll understand things better. You'll understand it better by and by. When you get a little older, you'll be able to control yourself a little bit better. And then they see some old person out of control. See, you ought to be able to control things when you're older. You know, years ago, when I was young, I wanted a Datsun 280Z. Now, young folks don't even know what that was. I don't think they make them anymore. A Datsun 280Z was this beautiful, beautiful car that had only 2 seats. And I had these ladies in the church in Fulton, 2 of them. They always went, I took them to the doctor, we did all kinds of things. So I told them, I said, I'm getting ready to go and get me a new car. And they said, what kind are you going to get? I said, I'm going to get me a Datsun 280Z. Well, they didn't know what that was. They said, why you want out the it goes 160 miles per hour and it has 2 seats. And one named Susie and the other one named Myrtle. Susie was a member of my church and Myrtle was a member of the Baptist church, but we always went places together. So she said, where is Myrtle going to sit? Basically, she was saying, you are a preacher. You have to ride these church ladies around. These old ladies have to go places. They have to go to the doctor. You cannot have it. They couldn't even get in a Datsun 280Z. You know, that little seat buckets like a race car. They say, you can't have a car like that. You have to outgrow that. Oh, it was tough. Well, several years I didn't buy it. I had a big old car that they could ride in. But it was a wonderful, and I always think, if I had got my Datsun 280Z. And back that time, you had to order them. It took about 6 months to get them. So years later, after I was in St. Louis, I saw one. Old Datsun 280Z. And I bought it. And in about a year, I gave the thing away to some kid. Because I had outgrown that. You see, but it was just nice to ride it just one day out. Let the young folks see it. But at some point you outgrow those kind of things. You outgrow the need for that kind of foolishness and flashiness. Now, one thing I have not outgrown is just beating kids playing basketball. But I'll outgrow that eventually. Whenever older people don't outgrow things that are childish, they indicate that these things have more power over them than they should, and that they are not growing in grace as they should be. Now, the last thing, and I'm skipping some things, but the last thing is that when you act badly in your old age, you lose the chance to put dignity on your life at the end. You lose the chance to correct some things that might be out of order. You see, I came to the conclusion years ago that an ordinary life can be elevated to greatness by a noble ending. And an otherwise great life can be pulled down by a bad ending. Oh, it's important to end your life end well. It can be bad. You know, having grown up in the South, in a very turbulent time, we had examples before us that we had to come to judgments about them based upon what we saw at the time. And we came to some conclusion about white people. There we saw at the time. I came up in Mississippi at a very turbulent time. I remember when I was in high school that the people in Mississippi, in Greenville, Mississippi, closed the swimming pool because they did not want black children and white children to swim together. I saw people march and demonstrate, and I saw people protest, and I saw white parents stand out in front of schools to keep black children from attending them. So the governor of Mississippi stand in the door of Ole Miss University to keep James Meredith from going in. And that's why Martin Luther King has in his speech, I have a dream, that in Mississippi, with his vicious governor, with his words dripping, his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. Well, interposition and nullification means that when an individual of authority interposes himself within the law and nullifies the law. And that's what the governor did. That's what I had seen. But here is the other side of that. I saw those same white people who have been labeled racist, who have been labeled terrible people. I saw those same white people, after the system was changed, grow older and change their attitudes and their behavior and became dear friends of some of the children that they had not wanted in their schools. For example, there was this man, Paul Bear Bryant, great coach, Fordyce, Arkansas, is where he's from, and he attended the University of Alabama, and he eventually became its coach, head football coach. And during the time that he was the coach of Alabama, they beat up on everybody. They beat up on UCLA. They beat up on Notre Dame. They beat up on Penn State. They beat everybody. This man standing there on the sideline with that funny looking hat on, Bear Bryant. Now this man was a coach in the same state that George Wallace was the governor, and this is the same state where the little children were bombed on a Sunday morning in a church in Birmingham. But that's where he was. And after he became legendary, then the people said he's a racist. That he must be a racist, that he had no black children on his team. And even some people said that he said he didn't want any. That he could win without them. And he had won without them. But when everybody else got them, he was having more difficulty winning without them. When UCLA got them and went there and beat them, he went to the chancellor and said, we need to get some black children on our team. And they recruited black kids. And he treated those black kids with the same kind of fatherliness that he had treated the rest of them. He put Ken Stabler off the team once for being out of control. And he kicked Joe Namath off for a couple of games. So he was a tough guy of the whites and the blacks. When Bear Bryant, in his last years, those black children had become very much a part of his teams and his life. Bear Bryant died 28 days after his last game. And the last thing that people can remember is on his funeral, throngs of people lined the street. And what people remember, that the last group of men, the pallbearers, that carried his body to its eternal remains, two of those boys, pallbearers, were black. oh, the way your life ends can be a very, very dignified crowning touch on the rest of it. And all the people who had said he was a racist, when they watched the funeral and watched these young black men and old boys who had played for them, they were there at the funerals. And they had to have second thoughts about this man and his racial attitude. Your last years give you a chance to fix things, to correct things, to put things in their final perspective. I had an uncle. Uncle Robert was his name. He was a big, strong black guy, and he had this wife. And they fought when they were younger. He was one of those men who believed that if the wife got out of hand, it's terrible now to talk about. But anyway, you know the type. Well, they broke up for years, and they finally got back together. And years after they got back together, my auntie had a stroke and lived for several years after that. And I would go to Champaign, Illinois to visit them. And you wouldn't have believed how this man, this big, strong, we thought mean man, so gently took care of his wife. It was a transformation almost unbelievable. But we came to a conclusion he was never as bad as we thought he was. But he was absolutely a marvelous man. Gentle, kind, every bit the Christian that his brother was, who went to church every Sunday. And this man almost never went. Oh, when you act bad in your old age, you miss the opportunity to put a signature on your life that could leave a lasting legacy of your goodness and your decency. That's why it is so terrible when old men act badly. And this country, when you have out of control children, when you have young men struggling to be good fathers and good husbands, when you have young people going into professions looking for models of how to do what they are trying to do, when you have young people coming into the church looking for guidelines of how to be a good Christian, we need older people to live dignified, responsible lives so that folk can look up to them. And it can be said of them, so live that when thy summons come to join that innumerable caravan which moves toward the mysterious realm where each shall take his place in the silent chamber of death, thou goest not like the quarry slave that night scourged to his dungeon, but sustained and soothed by an unfaltering trust. Approach thy grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams.